By now, most of you chumps probably are aware that Boomeo, you've probably heard of that company before, offers some kind of a premium service where you can play and get all this premium content as well. But for some of those scrubbish, little skrillless miscreants that watch these videos and just want that free shit, guess what? They have free content as well. If you go, today I was watching a free guide where SK Gaming captain Fallen tells you how to do some hits onto the B site as terrorist on Overpass. Now, Overpass is actually my favorite map at the moment, and particularly how the slow setup onto A leads into how you open up the B site for those fast hits, the ones that the Danish teams like Astralis, North, formerly Dingtas, and Heroic are actually famously good at. And obviously, Fallen's team on Overpass, when they were in the latter part of last year, one of the best teams of all time on that map. So having this guy break it down for you really gives you some insight as to what the mechanisms are, what the dynamics are to allow those B hits to work. Now, the ESL Pro League is a league which every time we get to the offline finals draws a lot of flack due to some of the results and then what that means for the field going into the offline finals, where they have the 6 EU teams and the 6 NA teams meet up and they play the offline finals. Because, first and foremost, online leagues get flack as it is. I mean, I directly myself blame them for a big part of the oversaturation in Counter-Strike. And obviously, they're some of the least important matches in the context of the big offline tournaments, people's careers. And yet they take up so much time. And obviously, they then decide who gets to play at LANs. So sometimes very good LAN teams don't make it there. But the big problem is not something that ESL can necessarily fix. I don't think it's actually their fault in many senses if you look at their perspective of what they're doing with this league. Because yes, okay, the Premier Online League having all these troubling outcomes, especially in the European division, which has always been very stacked, which then leads to less competitive offline finals. As a purist who enjoys watching really stacked fields in offline competition, yes, that is a problem for me. Yes, I would in some senses wish the format could be changed so that we'd ensure more of those top EU teams get there. That there would be a phase there, there would be an Astralis there. And so it does lead to offline events which have the prize money and in the theoretical prestige of the biggest events in the world that are non-majors, but they end up having fields that just aren't that stacked when it comes to tier 1 teams and are frequently missing potential champions or elite teams in the offline environment. But this isn't necessarily ESL's fault when you lay out what ESL Pro League is and what the purpose of it is and how it makes its money. Because, first of all, it is an online league. The actual main body of what ESL Pro League is about is the online league. That has to be the primary focus, not the LAN. Now, the LAN is where the players make their big prize money and where those of us who are purists and aficionados of the game want to watch the game and don't care so much about the online results. But ESL and everyone else involved is actually primarily concerned with the online league. That's the moneymaker for everyone who is involved with ESL Pro League. Now, for ESL, that's where they get the majority of the viewing hours. You get way more games and way more matches watched online than at the LAN. That's also very cheap for them. To just run the online matches isn't the same as having to put hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into running the LAN itself. The viewing hours are the main aspect they get there. Also, you get all the top teams competing in it, so you get all the fan bases of all around Europe and all around the North American region tuning into these online matches to some degree. And then if you're the players and the teams, well, for the teams especially, this is all about exposure. Again, when you go to your sponsors and you tell them, right, if you sponsor me, here's what you get. One of the things you can give them, a real hard number as a result of Pro League, is I'm going to be playing in the top online league. So we're going to be playing this many matches, this many hours that your sponsors involved with us, that people are aware of the fact that you sponsor our team and our team has exposure level. And it doesn't matter if our team finishes in last place. You get those hours guaranteed and you get to play that many matches. That's why things like reducing the number of matches or changing the format to not being a league, those don't really work for what ESL Pro League is and how it makes its money. Then you've got to add in, okay, so the real problem isn't even the online league. I mean, I can just choose not to watch that. It's the fact that it's then used as qualification for the LAN, right? You can't just invite the teams. So that's the problem. When people have tried to hypothetically come up with a solution, you think to yourself, right, well, how about this? How about we just invite the top 4 teams? Because really it only matters if it's the top 4 that don't make it. If it is a North or a Navi who don't qualify, that's touch and go. Maybe they wouldn't have been that great offline anyway. But when it's the FaZes and Astralis of the world, teams that if we were doing invites would 100% get the invite, that's where it's easy to fall into the temptation of saying, right, just invite the top 2 to 3 teams from each region and then have Pro League play out so that you can win prize money if you're those teams, and if not, you can qualify if you're the other teams, and have it be a bit more like most Tier 1 league tournaments where we have the invites and then we have the qualification spots. The problem with that is that this is a league. So first of all, that ruins the integrity of the league, really. You didn't get to the offline finals by your performance in the league if you get invited if you're in a FaZe Astralis. So it actually, to some degree, removes the storyline for those teams. So either they don't compete in your league, which means you lose having the top teams, so that can't happen right there. That's one of the main draws of the league. Or the teams play, but they're already know that, like if you're Astralis and FaZe, you know you're going to qualify, so you could just dick around and not even try that hard. That will upset other people's results and spoil them and ruin the integrity in that regard. And it removes the whole storyline of the reason why they're at the offline finals is based on what happened in online play. So for example, G2 is a team where they started off EPL very poorly, but then they had this really strong run towards the end. And now when they come into the line finals, that's the storyline people will be using, that their form's gotten better and better. And now perhaps they're even going to win the league by qualifying for this offline tournament ahead of some of the other favourites who would have been ahead of them in many people's and in the bookies' kind of minds as to who could win the league. Also, when you look at this, if you have a qualification slot breakdown like this, another thing that people often suggest, and this is one of the few pieces that I actually think could be played with, is okay, maybe what you do instead is you take the qualification spots and you give more to EU and less to NA. So at the moment you get 6 from each. Now I'm actually on board with this one. I think this is fairly reasonable because the obvious way to do it to me would be to give 8 slots to Europe and give 4 to NA. Now if you think historically in NA, except for, in fact, almost never have there been 5 strong teams coming out of NA. Now, admittedly, it's problematic that you have the Brazilians play there because it's not really true NA teams. You know, SK is almost certainly going to qualify and Voltal's very likely going to qualify. So they're taking away spots from the NA teams. But that's its own problem. So what I would say is this. In general, if you go and look when Optic was really good, well, that was a period when Team Liquid was non-existent. Then you go and look at when Team Liquid was on top, and that's when Cloud9 was having problems. And so, really, there never have been the 4 or more teams from NA that were really strong. So I don't think having 4 is unfair. I think if you go back to all the seasons of Pro League, it's usually only 1 to 2 NA teams that are pretty legit, and then the other ones that qualify don't tend to do a whole lot. Meanwhile, in Europe, we know that there are very strong teams who won't finish top 6 in Europe, and we know that they all have a chance anyway to do more damage. So I wouldn't mind that change being made. The big problem I have with that is, then I'm concerned that if you make less spots in NA, so you make it so only the top 4 qualify, that teams who are just outside of being able to qualify but have a bunch of games left, just know what NA players are like, might just dick around and not try properly, and therefore their results where they can't qualify yet anyway will unduly affect what happens to the other teams that are battling for qualification. Now, I realise that can already happen with the bottom place teams, but you'd just be making even more teams who potentially could stop caring and just quit out in that respect. I don't think, because the big problem in NA is obviously a lot of those teams as you go down don't make as much money, aren't really as pro on the same level, whereas yeah, teams that like Virtus Pro is second to last in Europe, they're still going to try in theory, and they're still going to play like professionals even when they can't qualify at that point in time. So I did have a concept approach as to how you could clean up some of these issues. The problem with them is they very unlikely that they would be implemented by ESL, and for what EPL has been so far, I don't really see it fitting the theme. But okay, here's how I would try and fix it. If I wanted to allow the same qualities to exist in Pro League, but then have it so that I fix some of the offline concepts. So what I would do is, first and foremost, one approach you could take is make Pro League purely an online league. So what I do is take all the prize money and I say, actually, the prize money for this league goes into the online league. So finishing first place in the online league, that'll be worth a lot. I'm going to make that worth a lot of money. And every slot in Pro League is going to have a drop down, but it's going to be enough that even if you're in 9th, you're still battling really hard to come 8th because you get some more money. That would be one approach. So then it's its own thing. It is online. Sure, and online results, do they matter as much? Well, no. But they matter in their own right, and so have it be its own entity. Then it doesn't interact with offline. As I mentioned in my other video about online play, it's only when it really starts to affect offline play that it annoys me, and as a purist, I'm like, oh, I want to see these better teams play, not scrub teams like Envious who'll never do anything at the LAN. So that would be one approach. Then what I thought you could do is after the league, which you make clear that this is a separate thing, you do have a component in the league where the top X teams get invited to a LAN. But the whole thing is it's not the offline finals. That's the way we're going to make this separate. What we'll do is the top teams are obviously playing for the prize money and to place in the league. So it's more traditional like a European sport than just a league. And then, so let's say the top 2 to 3 spots get an invite automatically to a LAN. But the LAN isn't the offline finals. The LAN's like the EPL Premier. So we could have one in Europe one year, one in NA. The EPL NA Premier. And the top 3 NA teams and the top 3 EU teams get invited there. So if mouse sports play very well and place highly, they get invited. And then you populate the other spots at that LAN with some invites. And so you make a very clear distinction, and it is just more like another tournament. And that just happens to qualify. It's not the main goal. It doesn't, in that sense, I think, ruin the integrity of the league. Now, the reason why, even though I suggested some hypotheticals of what you could do there and some like proposed changes, I don't think they'll happen. I don't think it's that big a deal. It's because at the moment, one thing I will say is we still do have a really good circuit in CSGO. We have a very well-populated circuit with lots of tier 1 LANs, and we have lots of opportunities to see different teams play on big LANs. And so with a big enough circuit, with enough big LANs, it's not absolutely vital that EPL has the best offline finals. As a purist, yes, I would love it if every big tournament had all the top teams there. Then again, as a purist, I'd love it if we got rid of group stages and stopped having scrub teams then, just had the best teams there and had them all battle and play like double elimination with best of 3 series and a different map veto system to get the real best. But again, these things aren't necessarily going to happen, and obviously that wouldn't play into the model of what Pro League is, how it exists as a moneymaker for ESL, but also for the teams. Believe me, Cloud9s, etc. want those Pro League spots, and that's a big part of how they're able to sell advertising on their CSGO division, not just whether the team wins the LAN. It's more beneficial to play all those seasons of Pro League, whether you win the LAN or not, than to win Season 4 like Cloud9 did last year. So in terms of what EPL is, if you understand and appreciate the context and the perspective of where ESL is coming from, there's not a whole lot they can change. And yes, while we don't like some of the results, some of us, that's just, unfortunately, it's what comes with the territory.
Hey guys, it's Thorin, also known as 944. Don't forget Thorin's YouTube channel.